He didn't notice the clause. Not on the day we got married? Not when he moved me into his penthouse overlooking Central Park. Not when he handed me the black Amex and told me, softly, like it was love, "Don't worry about money anymore. I'll handle everything." That was the first lie. Not because it wasn't true, but because he believed control and care were the same thing. And I let him believe that. For 3 years. 3 years of perfectly curated silence. 3 years of him choosing where we lived, what we invested in, who we dined with, and how I was introduced. "This is my wife? Claire," he would say at dinners. One hand resting lightly at my back. "She doesn't really work. She just manages life." They always laughed. Men in brioni suits, women adjusting their Cartier bracelets, waiters refilling wine like nothing in the room was wrong. And I would smile, not because I agreed, because I was waiting. The night everything changed didn't begin with a fight. It began with a dinner invitation. Private. Exclusive. A table at 11 Madison Park. 4 seats. Ethan booked it himself. That alone was unusual. Because Ethan never booked anything without purpose. He curated people the way some men curate investments. Strategically. Emotionally detached. Profitable. I noticed the detail before I noticed the danger. Reservation for 4. Not 2. Not business. Not labeled. Just 4. I asked him about it while standing in the dressing room, slipping into a black silk dress I'd bought from Saint Laurent months earlier and never worn. "Who's joining us?" I asked. He didn't look up from his phone. "Just someone I think you should meet." Just someone. That phrase sat wrong in my chest. Ethan didn't do just someone. He did calculated introductions, controlled narratives, pre-approved outcomes. I should have asked more questions, but I didn't. Because sometimes the fastest way to uncover the truth is to let it happen exactly as planned. The restaurant glowed like money, pretending to be quiet. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, voices lowered not out of politeness but because everyone in the room believed they mattered. We were seated immediately. Of course we were. Ethan didn't wait. The host smiled too quickly. "They've already arrived." Already. That word landed harder than it should have. Because it meant I was the last person to know something. And in Ethan's world, that was never accidental. We walked toward the table. I noticed details first. A woman. Elegant. Controlled. Wearing a cream Max Mara coat draped over the chair. A glass of white wine untouched. And across from her, a man. Older. Sharp. The kind of man who didn't look at people, he assessed them. Ethan slowed. Just slightly. That was the first crack. Then the woman looked up. And smiled. Not at me. At him. Familiar. Too familiar. "You're late," she said softly. Not, "Hello." Not, "Nice to meet you." My stomach dropped. Not because I understood yet. Because I didn't. And that's always worse. Ethan pulled out my chair. Gentle. Controlled. "Claire," he said. Voice smooth. Rehearsed. "This is Victoria." Victoria stood. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. The kind of woman who had never needed to raise her voice to get what she wanted. "I've heard so much about you," she said. I looked at her. Then at Ethan. Then back at her. "No," I said quietly. "You haven't." Something shifted. Barely visible, but enough. The man across from her spoke next. "And I assume," he said. Voice low. "Precisi. You haven't been told why you're here." There it was. The moment. The one you don't recognize until later. When you realize your life just changed direction. I looked at Ethan. Really looked at him. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't see control. I saw tension. Hidden, but real. "Ethan," I said. "What is this?" He exhaled slowly. And smiled. The same smile he used in boardrooms. In negotiations. In situations where truth needed to be introduced carefully. Or not at all. "Claire," he said. "This is about structure." Structure. That word hit harder than anything else. Not love. Not marriage. Not us. Structure. And suddenly, everything I had been quietly observing for 3 years made sense. The accounts? The restrictions? The way my name never appeared first on anything? The way decisions were always explained after they were already made? The way I had been slowly, professionally, removed from my own life? I leaned back in my chair, still, and for the first time that night, I smiled. Because Ethan thought this dinner was where he would finally explain things, where he would take control of the narrative, where he would define my role in whatever version of reality he had been building. He had no idea. I had already signed something 3 years ago. That made this entire conversation irrelevant. I folded my hands on the table, looked directly at Victoria, then at the man, then back at my husband, and said, softly, "Go ahead, explain your structure." Because I wanted to hear it, every word, every carefully chosen sentence, every lie dressed up as logic. I wanted him to finish. Completely. Before I told him, he had built his entire life on a contract he never read. And the moment he finished speaking, everything he controlled would belong to me. Ethan didn't rush. That was always his strength. Men like him don't panic when they're exposed. They slow down. They choose words like they're selecting pieces on a board. Measured. Intentional. Clean. He folded his hands on the table and looked at me not like a husband, but like a man preparing to present something already decided. In fact, he said calmly. What you're about to hear may feel abrupt. I almost smiled. Not wrong, just incomplete. Victoria watched him with quiet confidence, like she had already heard this version before. The man across from her leaned back slightly, observing, evaluating, not surprised. That told me everything. This wasn't a conversation. It was a reveal, and I was the only one who hadn't been briefed. Ethan continued. Our current structure isn't sustainable long term. Structure again? Always structure, never marriage, never love, never truth. I tilted my head slightly. Define our why, I said. A small pause, barely noticeable. But it was there, the life we've built. He corrected. Better, cleaner, softer, still not honest. He reached for his water glass but didn't drink. Just something to do with his hands. I've been working with Victoria and her firm, he continued, to optimize certain financial and legal exposures. Victoria gave a small, professional nod, not warm, not apologetic, efficient, like this was a meeting, because to them, it was. I glanced at her. What kind of exposures require introducing your wife at dinner? I asked. Her smile didn't break. Transparent ones, she said. Interesting. I turned back to Ethan. And what exactly am I being made transparent to? That was when he said it. Carefully, softly, like it might hurt less if it sounded reasonable. There are assets, he said, that need to be repositioned. Repositioned. I let that word sit, because words like that always hide something uglier underneath. And where? I asked. Am I being repositioned to? Another pause. This one longer. The man across the table finally spoke again. You're currently listed in several structures that complicate future transitions, he said. Future transitions. I felt something cold settle into place. Not shock. Recognition. I had seen this before. Not in my life. In documents. In language. In contracts written by people who never intended to be questioned. You mean? I said slowly. I'm inconvenient. Silence. Perfect silence. Because truth doesn't need translation. Ethan leaned forward slightly. No, he said. You're misaligned. Misaligned. That almost impressed me. He had found a way to downgrade a wife into a formatting issue. I looked at him for a long second. Then I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Because this entire performance was exactly what I had been waiting for. You built all of this, I said quietly, without telling me. His jaw tightened. It wasn't necessary at the time. There it was. The real sentence. Not necessary. Not required. Not relevant. I nodded slowly. And now it is? Yes. Because now he needed me to cooperate. To sign something. To agree. To step aside. Cleanly. That was the part men like Ethan always underestimate. They don't fear conflict. They fear resistance that looks calm. Victoria slid a thin folder across the table. There it was. Paper. Always paper. Because at the end of every betrayal, there's documentation waiting to finalize it. This outlines the proposed adjustments, she said. Adjustments. Of course. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I looked at Ethan. And if I don't agree? The man across from Victoria answered this time. His voice was neutral. Practiced. You would make things significantly more complicated. For everyone. For everyone. I almost smiled again. Because that sentence had been designed for me. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just inconvenient. But here's the thing about inconvenience. It only works on people who are afraid of disruption. I wasn't. Not anymore. I finally reached for the folder. Opened it. And there it was. Clean. Precise. Beautifully written. The language of removal. Asset separation. Adjusted beneficiary pathways. Revised ownership allocations. Everything structured to make it look like evolution. Not elimination. My name appeared. Just less. Everywhere. Less authority. Less visibility. Less control. And at the bottom, a signature line. Waiting. I closed the folder slowly, then placed it back on the table. I have a question, I said. Ethan nodded. Of course. I looked directly at him, not at Victoria. Not at the man. Him. When did you decide I was temporary? That landed. Not because it was loud. Because it was precise. His expression didn't break. But something behind it shifted. That's not what this is, he said. Then explain it differently. Silence. Because he couldn't. Not without saying the truth out loud. And truth, in rooms like this, is rarely convenient. I leaned back in my chair. Still. Controlled. Exactly the way he had taught me to be. Then I picked up my wineglass, took a slow sip, and said the sentence that changed everything. You should have read the contract. Nothing moved. Not immediately. But I saw it. In Ethan's eyes. That flicker. That tiny, almost invisible moment where certainty breaks. What contract? He asked. Careful. Too careful. Victoria looked between us. The man leaned forward slightly. Interested now. I placed the glass down, folded my hands, and met his gaze. The one I signed. I said, the day we got married. Ethan frowned. Confusion. Real this time. I reviewed everything. He said, no. He didn't. And we both knew it. I tilted my head slightly. Did you? I asked. Silence. Then I leaned forward. Just enough. Lowered my voice. Not for drama. For precision. Or did you assume? I continued. That anything with my name on it didn't matter? That hit. Harder than anything else that night. Because it wasn't about the contract. It was about his belief. His assumption. His pattern. Control everything. Read selectively. Ignore what feels irrelevant. Especially if it belongs to me. Ethan's expression changed. Not anger. Not yet. Something sharper. Concern. Because he was finally asking the right question. Just 3 years too late. What are you talking about? He said. I held his gaze. Didn't rush. Didn't explain. Because timing is everything. And for the first time since this dinner began, I was the one controlling it. You built a system, I said quietly. Without realizing, I paused. Just long enough. Then finished. I was already inside it. No one spoke. No one moved. The air shifted. Subtly. But completely. Victoria looked at Ethan. The man across from her sat up straighter. And Ethan, for the first time that night, I didn't have a response ready. I leaned back in my chair. Unbothered. Untouchable. And I let the silence do what it was supposed to do. Spread. Because the most dangerous moment in any room is when the person you thought you controlled stops reacting and starts revealing. And the worst part? I still hadn't told him what the clause actually said. Not yet. But when I did, everything he had just built, it was going to collapse. Quietly. Legally. Irreversibly. Ethan didn't like silence. Not this kind. Not the kind that didn't belong to him. The kind where he would lead the pace. the direction, the outcome. I watched it happen in real time. That shift, that almost imperceptible crack in the version of himself he presented to the world. What clause? He asked again. But this time, it wasn't calm. It was careful. And careful meant uncertain. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Interested now. Not confident. Not in control. Just curious. That was new. The man beside her adjusted his posture. No longer passive, he was calculating again. Re-evaluating. Because the room had changed. And they all felt it. I let a few seconds pass. Long enough to make them uncomfortable. Short enough to keep control. Then I reached into my bag. Deliberate. No rush. Because the moment you rush, you lose power. I pulled out my phone. Black. Minimal. The same one Ethan had bought me 2 years ago after replacing my old one without asking. Security upgrade, he had said. Control always sounds like protection when it's explained correctly. I unlocked it. Opened a folder. Not recent. Not obvious. Buried. Exactly where it needed to be. Then I placed the phone on the table. Turned it toward him. A document. Scanned. Signed. Dated. 3 years ago. The day of our wedding. Ethan didn't touch it. He just looked. Eyes moving. Reading. Processing. Slower than I expected. Faster than I wanted. Victoria stood up slightly from her seat. May I? She asked. I nodded. Of course. Because this wasn't for Ethan anymore. It was for her. She picked up the phone. Her expression stayed composed. Professional. Controlled. Until it didn't. It happened halfway down the page. A pause. A stillness. Then she read it again. That was when I knew. She found it. The clause. The one Ethan never noticed. The one hidden in plain sight. The one written so cleanly. It looked harmless. Until you understood it. Victoria slowly placed the phone back on the table. But she didn't sit down. She looked at Ethan. And for the first time that night, her confidence broke. You didn't review this? She asked. Not to me. To him. Ethan frowned. I told you I went through everything. No. He didn't. He skimmed. He assumed. He trusted his position more than the paper in front of him. That's what men like him do. They believe control makes details unnecessary. Victoria shook her head slightly. This changes everything. There it was. The sentence. The one that splits a room in half. Before. And after. Ethan's jaw tightened. Explain. Not a request. A demand. But it didn't land the way it used to. Not anymore. Victoria hesitated. Just for a second, because she was choosing between two things. Her client and the truth. She chose the truth. Because professionals always do. Eventually, this clause, she said slowly, establishes conditional control over any jointly structured asset in the event of unilateral restructuring without mutual consent. Silence. Heavy. Precise. Unavoidable. Ethan blinked. Twice. Then he leaned forward. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I let her. Because it sounds more real. When it doesn't come from the person you underestimated. Victoria inhaled slowly. It means, she said, that if you attempt to reposition assets without her authorization, she stopped. Not because she didn't know. Because she didn't want to say it. The man beside her finished it. Control transfers. There it was. Clean. Final. Irreversible. Ethan looked at me. Really looked this time. Not as his wife. Not as someone in his life. But as a variable he had failed to account for. That's not possible, he said. But sharp. I tilted my head slightly. Read the next section. He grabbed the phone now. No hesitation. Scrolled. Faster. Eyes scanning. Searching. And then, he stopped. Because he found it. The enforcement mechanism. Time-bound. Automatic. Legally airtight. No negotiation. No delay. No interpretation. If triggered, everything shifted. Immediately. His breath changed. Just slightly. But enough. Victoria spoke again. Ethan, have you already initiated the restructuring? Silence. That was his answer. The man across from her leaned back slowly. Processing. Recalculating. You filed preliminary documents last week, he said. Not a question. A statement. Ethan didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. which meant it was already in motion. And that meant the clause was already active. Victoria closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them. Calm again, but different, colder. This isn't reversible, she said. Ethan's voice dropped. How long? That was the only question that mattered now. Control. Damage. Victoria looked at the document again, then at me, then back at him. 72 hours from the moment of filing stain. 72 hours. I watched it hit him, not like a shock, like a realization, because now he understood. This dinner wasn't his move. It was mine, 3 years ago, and it had just caught up with him. When did it trigger? He asked. No one answered, because we all knew. He had signed the first restructuring document 2 days ago. 48 hours had already passed. That left 24. I picked up my wine glass again, unbothered, as if none of this mattered, as if everything wasn't about to collapse around him. Then I looked at him and smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough. You should probably hurry, I said softly. Time matters now. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The room had shifted, completely. Ethan wasn't in control anymore. Not of the narrative, not of the assets, not of me. And the worst part? I still hadn't told him what happened at hour 72, but he was about to find out. Ethan stood up too fast. That was the first real sign. Not the silence, not the questions. The speed. Control doesn't move fast. Control moves deliberately. But panic moves quickly and pretends it's strategy. We're leaving, he said. Not to me. To the room. To the situation. To the version of himself that was starting to slip. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my coat. I didn't even look at him. Instead, I took another sip of wine. Measured. Untauscheled. Claire, he said again. Sharper this time. I turned my head slowly. Sit down. 2 words, but absolute. And for a second, just one, he did. Not fully, not consciously, but enough to reveal something. He wasn't sure anymore. Victoria noticed it too. So did the man across from her. Power isn't about who speaks louder. It's about who doesn't need to. Ethan exhaled, then sat back down. Controlled again. But not the same. Not anymore. Tell me exactly what happens at 72 hours, he said. Direct. Focused. Urgent. Now he was asking the right questions. I placed my glass down, folded my hands, and finally, I gave him something. Everything you moved, I said calmly. Reverses. He shook his head immediately. That's not how. I raised a finger. Just slightly. And he stopped. And transfers, I continued. Into the original protected structure. Silence. Heavy, because he understood what that meant. The man across from Victoria said it out loud. For clarity, he leaned forward, eyes locked on me. You're saying all assets he attempted to reposition. A pause. Will legally consolidate under your control. I met his gaze. Yes. No hesitation. No softness. No apology. Victoria sat down slowly. Her voice was quieter now. Ethan. If that clause is enforceable, it is. I cut in. Not aggressive. Just certain. Because uncertainty is where people try to negotiate. And I wasn't offering that. Ethan's hands clenched on the table. Subtle. But visible. How much? He asked. Not, is it true? Not, can we stop it? Just, how much? That told me everything. I tilted my head slightly. Enough. That wasn't the answer he wanted. So I gave him a better one. The holding company. I said. The Midtown property. The equity positions in your private accounts. Each word landed like a controlled detonation. Small. Precise. Devastating. Victoria closed her eyes again. Just for a second, because she knew. All of it, everything he had built to isolate control, was about to collapse into one place. Me. That's not possible, Ethan said again. But now, it sounded different. Less like denial, more like hope. And hope is dangerous when it comes too late. You structured everything to remove me, I said, so the clause treated that as breach. He leaned forward, You signed the same agreements. No, I said softly. I signed something else. That was the part he never questioned. Because he never thought I would. 3 years ago, he had walked into that marriage, believing he was the only one preparing for the future. He never asked what I had prepared for. His phone buzzed. Sharp. Out of place in a room that had gone completely still. He looked at it. Didn't answer. It buzzed again. This time, he picked it up. Yeah. A pause. Then his expression changed. Subtly. But enough. What do you mean flagged? Victoria sat up straighter. What is it? He didn't respond immediately. Listening. Processing. Then, no. Don't move anything yet. Too late. That was the problem. Everything had already been set in motion. He ended the call. Looked at me. You triggered something, he said. I smiled faintly. No. Another pause. I didn't trigger anything. I leaned in slightly. You did. Silence. Victoria's voice cut through it. What was flagged? Ethan hesitated, then said it anyway. The transfer requests are being held. Of course they were. Because the system recognized the clause. Because the structure he built was already rejecting him. Temporary. He added quickly. It has to be temporary. The man across from Victoria shook his head slowly. No, he said. This isn't temporary. He looked directly at Ethan. This is containment. That word changed everything. Containment meant the system wasn't just reacting. It was protecting. Protecting the clause. Protecting the outcome. Protecting me. Ethan stood up again. This time, no hesitation. I'm calling legal, he said. Victoria didn't stop him. Because she couldn't. Because this had already moved beyond strategy. Beyond influence. Beyond control. He stepped away from the table. Phone pressed to his ear. Voice low. Urgent. Sharp. I watched him. Still. Unmoved. For 3 years. I had watched him control every room he entered. Every conversation. Every outcome. Tonight, I watched him try to catch something that had already passed him. Victoria leaned toward me. Quiet. Careful. How long have you known? She asked. I met her eyes. Since before we got married. Her expression tightened. Not anger. Respect. Reluctant. But real. And you waited? She asked. Yes. Why? I glanced at Ethan. Still on the phone. Still trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Because timing, I said softly, is more important than truth. She nodded slowly. Because she understood. People like her always do. Ethan returned. Faster. More controlled. But different. Something behind his eyes had changed. Urgency had turned into calculation. That meant he was thinking again. Get his own clear, he said. Sitting down. We need to talk privately. No. We didn't. I shook my head. We're already talking. His jaw tightened. This isn't the place. I looked around. At the room. At the people. At the table where he had planned to remove me. Cleanly. Quietly. Professionally. Then I looked back at him. It is not of... I said. Because this was where he chose to do it. So this was where it would end. Tell me what you want, he said. There it was. Not control. Not control. Not structure. Negotiation. Finally, I leaned back, studied him, let the silence stretch just enough to make him feel it. Then I said the one thing he didn't expect. I don't want anything. That confused him. Because people like Ethan only understand transactions. Value. Exchange. Trade. And I wasn't offering any of that. This isn't about getting something from you. I continued. It's about removing something. His eyes narrowed. What? I held his gaze. Ayrton. Your control. Silence. Complete. Because for the first time, he understood what this really was. Not revenge. Not anger. Not emotion. Correction. And corrections. Don't negotiate. I picked up my glass one last time. Took a slow sip. Then stood. Smooth. Unhurried. I'll see you in 24 hours. I said. And I meant it. Because at hour 72, everything would finalize. Automatically. Legally. Irreversibly. And when it did, he wouldn't just lose assets. He would lose the one thing he built his entire life around. Control. I walked away from the table. He didn't stop me, because he finally understood there was nothing left to stop. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Ethan didn't sleep that night. Men like him don't. Not when something slips outside their control. Not when a system they built. By 17 Every lawyer he trusted had already been called. By 40 Three different firms were reviewing the clause. By 50 He was standing in his office, still in the same suit, watching Manhattan wake up like nothing had changed. But everything had. This clause shouldn't exist. That was the first thing his lead attorney said. Not invalid. Not illegal. Just, it shouldn't exist. Ethan didn't respond. He was staring at the document on the glass screen in front of him. Zoomed in. Section 14. San. The clause. Clean. Precise. Buried exactly where no one would look twice. You're telling me, Ethan said slowly, that I signed something that transfers control of my entire structure without my authorization? The attorney hesitated, then chose his words carefully. You authorized it, he said. You just didn't understand it. That landed harder than anything else. Because misunderstanding is a form of loss of control, and Ethan never misunderstood anything. Except this. Find the weakness, he said. No clause is airtight. The attorney didn't answer immediately, because he was already searching, scrolling, cross-referencing, looking for the one thing that could break it. A loophole, a delay, an interpretation, anything. Minutes passed. Then, there's no breach in drafting, he said. Language is tight. Execution is valid. Timeline is enforceable. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then find the leverage. There it was. If you can't break the system, you pressure the person behind it. But here's what Ethan didn't understand yet. I wasn't inside the system anymore. I was the system. By 30 im. I was already awake. Not because I couldn't sleep. Because I chose not to. I stood by the window of the penthouse, barefoot, wearing the same oversized cashmere sweater I always wore on quiet mornings. The one from Loro Piana, he once said, made me look effortlessly expensive. He liked that phrase, effortless, because it made control look natural. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Of course. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Claire. His voice, lower now, tighter, controlled but forced. Good morning. Ethan. A pause. Then, we need to fix this. Not talk. Not understand. Fix. I walked toward the kitchen slowly, poured myself coffee. Black. No. I said, we don't. Silence. Because that wasn't a response he knew how to work with. You don't understand the implications, he said. I almost laughed. I understand them perfectly. Another pause. Then, tell me what you want. Again. Still trying to make this a negotiation. Still thinking there was a price. There's nothing to negotiate, I said calmly. You made a move, the clause responded. That clause wasn't meant for this. That was the closest he had come to the truth. I leaned against the counter. It was designed for exactly this. Silence. Longer this time, because now, he was starting to see the shape of it. You planned this, he said. Not a question, a realization. I didn't answer, because confirmation wasn't necessary. Back in his office, the investigation was accelerating. Multiple screens, multiple teams, documents opened, histories traced, signatures verified, everything leading back to one moment. 3 years ago, the day we got married. Who drafted this? One of the lawyers asked. Ethan didn't respond immediately, because he already knew the answer. Not a firm, not a team, not someone he controlled. You didn't bring this to us. The lawyer continued. No, Ethan said quietly. I didn't. That was the mistake. The only one that mattered. By noon, they found something. Not a flaw, not a weakness, but a detail. And details change outcomes. There's an origin reference, the attorney said. Ethan looked up. Explain. This clause isn't standalone. He pulled up another document. Older. Separate. Connected. It's tied to an external structure. Ethan frowned. What structure? The attorney hesitated. Because now, this wasn't just legal. It was strategic. An independent trust. Silence. Not heavy. Sharp. Because now, everything shifted again. A trust? Ethan repeated. Yes. Under whose control? The attorney looked at him. Then at the document. Then back at him. That's the problem. A pause. Then, it's not yours. I was already dressed when the second call came. This time, not Ethan. A number I recognized. I answered immediately. Status? Contained. The voice replied. Clean. Professional. Any escalation? Yes. I smiled slightly. Of course there was. He's looking for leverage. The voice continued. Expected. I said. And the trust? Untouched. That was the only thing that mattered. Because everything else was surface. The real structure was somewhere else. Somewhere he couldn't reach. Somewhere he didn't even know how to look. Back in the office, Ethan stood completely still, processing, rebuilding the situation in his head, step by step, move by move. You're telling me, he said slowly, that even if I stop the current transfers, it won't matter, the attorney said, because the clause routes everything through that trust. And that trust controls the outcome. Silence. Then Ethan asked the question that finally mattered. Who owns it? The attorney looked at the screen, then at him, and said, it was established under her name. No. Not exactly, but close enough. Ethan exhaled slowly. Not panic. Not yet. Something else. Something sharper. Respect. Reluctant. But real. Because now, he understood. This wasn't a reaction. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't emotional. It was architecture. And he had walked directly into it. I stepped out of the building just after 2 p.m. Sunglasses on. Phone silent. The city moved around me like nothing had changed. Taxis. Voices. Footsteps. Normal. Always normal. That's the part people never understand. The biggest collapses don't look like anything from the outside. I paused for a second, looked up at the skyline, then checked the time. 18 hours left. Not long, but enough. Enough for him to try something reckless. Enough for him to make one last move. And I knew he would. Because men like Ethan don't lose quietly. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message. From him. Just one line. We need to meet. Now. I stared at it for a second. Then typed back. No. No explanation. No delay. Because the moment you start explaining, you give them space to negotiate. And I wasn't giving him anything. Across the city, Ethan read the message. Then smiled. Just slightly. Because finally, he understood something important. If he couldn't break the system, he would have to break me. And for the first time since this began, he stopped reacting and started planning. And that was the only moment in this entire situation that almost became dangerous. Ethan stopped calling after that. No more requests. No more negotiations. No more Claire. We need to talk. That was how I knew. He had switched strategies, because when men like him stop asking, they start planning. The first sign came at 4:12 p.m. Not a call. Not a message. An alert. My email. Subject line. Urgent. Governance review. Immediate attendance required. From the holding company. My name listed. Primary stakeholder. Mandatory presence. I read it once. Then again. Then I smiled. Because this wasn't about governance. It was about pressure. Ethan had found a way to pull me into his arena. Boardroom. Formal. Controlled. The one place he still believed he could dominate. The meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. 2 hours. Enough time for him to prepare the room. Not enough time for him to change the outcome. When I arrived, everything was already in place. Of course it was. Glass walls. Long table. City lights bleeding into the room. And, at the center, Ethan. Standing. not sitting. Positioned at the head, like he hadn't already lost it. 3 other board members were present. 2 I recognized. 1 I didn't. Legal counsel at the far end, silent, observing, documenting. I walked in slowly. No rush. No hesitation. The sound of my heels was the only thing that moved in that room. Ethan watched me. Carefully. Not angry. Not emotional. Focused. Because that meant he was about to do something calculated. "Thank you for coming," he said. Polite. Controlled. Almost convincing. I took my seat. Not across from him. Not beside him. Diagonal. The position that lets you see everything. And be seen. "Let's begin," I said. No greeting. No small talk. No permission. Because I wasn't there to participate. I was there to finish it. Ethan nodded once. Then turned to the room. "We're here to address a structural issue," he said. "Of course. Always. Structure. Never the truth. There's been a misinterpretation of a contractual clause." "No," I said. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just enough. He stopped. Turned to me. "That's not accurate." I continued. The room shifted. Subtly. But enough. Because control had just changed direction. Ethan held my gaze. "This is a formal meeting," he said. "I suggest we follow proper process." I leaned back slightly. "Still. Then be precise." Silence. Because precision is where people like him lose. He turned back to the board. "As I was saying, there's a clause that's being enforced in a way that was never intended. You initiated restructuring," I said. Again, cutting cleanly through the narrative. "That triggered the clause." The man I didn't recognize spoke for the first time. "Is that accurate?" Straight. Direct. Unfiltered. That meant he wasn't aligned with Ethan. Ethan paused. Just for a second. Then, yes. Honest. Because he had to be. Because this wasn't a private conversation anymore. This was record. Victoria entered the room at that exact moment. Intentional. She didn't sit. She stood. "Before we continue," she said, "everyone here needs to understand the legal position." All eyes shifted. Because now, this wasn't about persuasion. It was about facts. "The clause is valid," she said. "Enforcement has already begun." Silence. Heavy. Irreversible. "The timeline?" one of the board members asked. 18 hours remaining." I checked the time. 17 now. Close enough. Ethan stepped forward. And this was where it changed. Because this wasn't about the clause anymore. This was about me. "You've all heard one side," he said. "And now you need to hear the context." There it was. The pivot. From legal to personal. From structure to narrative. He turned toward me. "Claire," he said softly. "Tell them why you really put that clause in place." The room shifted again. Because now, this wasn't about assets. It was about intent. And intent can be manipulated. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because I wanted to hear it. His version, the one he thought would break me. "She didn't trust the marriage," he continued. "She prepared for an exit before we even began." There it was. Clean. Convincing. Almost believable. To her. "This wasn't a partnership," he said. "It was a contingency plan." One of the board members frowned. "Is that true?" I looked at Ethan. Then at the room. Then back at him. And I almost smiled. Because this was his mistake. He thought framing it as distrust would weaken me. He thought exposing the clause as premeditated would make me look calculated. Detached. Dangerous. But here's the problem. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't understand why. "Yes," I said. Silence. Immediate. Total. I didn't trust the structure. I continued. Not him. Not the marriage. The structure. I didn't trust systems where one person holds all the control. I let that sit. Then added. So I built one where that couldn't happen. The man at the end of the table leaned forward. Interested. Not judgmental. That mattered. Ethan's expression tightened. Because this wasn't going the way he planned. This wasn't about protection, he said. It was about leverage. I nodded. Exactly. That stopped him. Because he expected denial. Defense. Emotion. Not agreement. Not clarity. Not ownership. I leaned forward slightly. Just enough. Let's be clear, I said. I didn't trigger anything. I looked around the room. Made sure everyone heard it. He did. Silence. Then I turned back to Ethan. You built a system to remove me. You just didn't realize. A pause. You had already agreed to what happens when you try. No one spoke. No one moved. Because the truth, once it's clear, doesn't need volume. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Small. Controlled. Different. Then let's stop pretending this is about structure, he said. There it was. Final shift. No more framing. No more positioning. Just him. And let's talk about what happens after the 72 hours. The room went still. Because that question, that was the real one. Not the clause. Not the transfer. What comes after? Ethan looked directly at me. Eyes steady. Focused. Dangerous. Because you may take control, he said quietly. But you won't keep it. Silence. Sharp. Intentional. You built something impressive, he continued. But you built it assuming I would stop at legal bitter. A pause. Then, I won't. That landed. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Because this was the first time. He wasn't trying to win the system. He was stepping outside it. And that was the only place he was still dangerous. I held his gaze. Didn't react. Didn't move. Because reaction is what he wanted. Doubt. Hesitation. I gave him none of that. Instead, I stood, controlled, final, and said the one thing he didn't expect. I know. Silence. Then I added, that's why I didn't just build a clause. A pause. Long enough. Then, I built everything else. The room shifted again. But this time, not toward him, toward me. Because now, they understood. The clause was never the real weapon. And Ethan finally realized. He wasn't trying to stop something. He was already inside it. 17 hours left. And now, he was out of moves. Or so he thought. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. The meeting didn't end. It paused. That's the difference. Endings are clean. Pauses are dangerous. Because everything that comes after is unpredictable. No one left the room. Not the board. Not legal. Not Ethan. And not me. Because now, no one wanted to miss what happened next. 17 hours had turned into 16. Time was no longer background. It was pressure. Visible. Constant. Closing in. Ethan sat down slowly. No more standing. No more positioning himself at the head. That was over. Now he was calculating. Again. And that version of him was the one people underestimated. Not the confident one. The quiet one. The one who stopped talking. You said you built everything else. His voice was calm again. Too calm. Explain. A request. Not a command. That meant he knew. He wasn't leading anymore. I didn't answer immediately. Because explanation is a form of control. And I was deciding how much to give. Instead, I reached for my phone. Placed it on the table. Screen down. No reveal. Just presence. Then I looked at Victoria. Are we recording? I asked. She blinked. Then nodded. Yes. Good. Because what I was about to say wasn't just for this room. I turned my phone over. Unlocked it. Opened a live dashboard. Numbers. Clean. Minimal. Real time. Then I rotated it toward the table. This, I said, is the trust. Silence. Because they expected something abstract, not something they could see. The man at the end of the table leaned forward. What am I looking at? Control flow. I said, assets. Voting rights. Liquid positions. Victoria stood up, walked closer, eyes scanning. Precise. Then she froze. Wait. A pause. Then, this isn't just holding his assets. No. It wasn't. I looked at Ethan, then back at the room. It never was. Ethan didn't move. Didn't speak. But I saw it. That shift. Again. Recognition. Because now, he was starting to understand the scale. You said everything else, he repeated. Yes. Silence. Then I said it. Clear. Irreversible. I didn't just prepare for what you might do to me. A pause. I prepared for what would happen when you tried. The room tightened. Not physically. Energetically. Because now, this wasn't a clause. It was a system. And systems don't collapse easily. Ethan leaned forward. Hands clasped. Eyes locked on mine. How far does it go? He asked. There it was. The only question left. I'm scale. Reach. Damage. I tilted my head slightly. Far enough. Not enough. So I gave him more. The partners you've been negotiating with this week. A pause. They're already inside it. That landed. One of the board members looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means, I said calmly, any agreement signed under your current structure. Routes through the trust. Victoria turned to Ethan. Is that true? He didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And that was worse. I tapped the screen once. A list appeared. Names. Companies. Familiar. Very familiar. The room reacted. Subtly. But visibly. Because now, this wasn't hypothetical. It was real. It was active. It was happening. Ethan stood again. But this time. Slower. Controlled. Measured. Dangerous. You're overplaying this, he said. Voice low. Steady. You don't have that kind of reach. I met his gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Watch me. I tapped the screen again. And that's when it happened. One of the numbers shifted. Instantly. A transaction. Small. But enough. Enough to prove it was live. Enough to prove it was real. Enough to prove this wasn't theory. It was execution. Victoria stepped back slightly. This is active control, she said. No one disagreed. Because no one could. Ethan looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. And for the first time, he didn't have a counter. No angle. No pressure. No move. This isn't just about me, he said. No, it wasn't. I nodded. It never was. Silence. Then I added, you built a system where control flowed one way. A pause. I just redirected it. The man at the end of the table spoke again. Careful. Measured. If what you're saying is accurate. He paused. Then finished. This isn't a transfer. No. It wasn't. I held his gaze. It's a takeover. That was the moment. The one every room has. The one where everything stops. Where no one speaks. Where no one moves. Because everyone realizes they're witnessing something they can't undo. Ethan exhaled slowly. Not panic. Not anger. Acceptance. Not of defeat. Of reality. You win the structure, he said quietly. There it was. The closest thing to admission. But structure isn't everything. No. It wasn't. And we both knew it. He stepped closer. Lowered his voice. Not for the room. For me. People still follow me, he said. They trust me. A pause. You can't transfer that. There it was. His final ground. Influence. Perception. Power outside the system. And for a second, just one, he thought that was enough. I looked at him. Really looked? And then I did the one thing that ended it. I smiled. Not cold. Not sharp. Certain. Because this was the part he never prepared for. I picked up my phone. Opened something new. Then turned it toward him. A video. Paused. Thumbnail visible. Title line clear. Clean. Professional. A pre-recorded statement. Time-stamped. Scheduled. Ethan frowned. What is this? I met his eyes. And said, the part you can't control. Then I tapped the screen. And the video went live. Silence. Absolute. Because whatever he thought he still had was about to disappear. In real time. In front of everyone. Without a single word from me. 16 hours left. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the moment that video started, he didn't just lose control. He lost the story. And in rooms like this, the story is everything. The video didn't start with me. That was intentional. It started with Ethan. Footage. Clean. Unedited. Time-stamped. Him in a private meeting room 2 weeks earlier. Different suit. Same tone. Same voice he used when he thought no one outside the room would ever hear him. We move everything before she notices, he said. It's certain. She won't understand the structure anyway. The room didn't react immediately. Not because they didn't hear it, because they needed a second to process what they were hearing. Truth, without context, always takes a second longer. The video continued. More clips, more meetings, more decisions. Each one carefully selected. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just accurate. She doesn't need to be involved. I'll handle the transition. We keep her name on paper until it's clean. Sentence by sentence, the version of him he controlled disappeared, and the real one took its place. No one spoke. No one moved, because there's a moment in every room where denial becomes impossible. This was that moment. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. Because he couldn't. Because everything in that video was real. I watched him. Not the screen. Him. Because this was the part that mattered. Not the exposure. Not the proof. The reaction. His jaw tightened. Then released. His shoulders dropped slightly. Not defeat. Adjustment. He was recalculating. Again. Always recalculating. Even now, the video ended. No music. No dramatic cut. Just silence. Victoria was the first to speak. Quiet. Careful. This changes liability. Of course it did. Because now, this wasn't just structural. It was intentional. Documented. Recorded. One of the board members leaned back slowly. Eyes still on Ethan. You initiated removal without disclosure. Not a question. A conclusion. Ethan didn't respond. Because he didn't need to. The answer was already in the room. The man at the end of the table closed his folder. Final. I think we all understand the position now. Yes. They did. Because there was nothing left to interpret. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about proving something. It was about allowing them to see it. On their own. Ethan finally looked at me. Not angry. Not defensive. Clear. For the first time since this started. Clear. You planned every step. He said. Not accusation. Recognition. I met his gaze. Yes. No softness. No apology. No hesitation. A small silence settled between us. Different from before. Not tense. Not sharp. Just finished. You could have left, he said. A pause. Without all of this. I nodded slightly. I could have. Silence. Then he asked the only question that still mattered to him. Why didn't you? I held his gaze. Still. And answered honestly. Because leaving would have changed my life. A pause. Then, I wanted to change yours. No one moved. Because that sentence. That was the ending. Not the assets. Not the clause. Not the trust. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then did something unexpected. He smiled. Not wide. Not bitter. Just acknowledging. You did. He said. The room shifted again. But this time, not toward conflict. Toward conclusion. Victoria spoke quietly with legal. Documents were already being prepared. Adjustments. Confirmations. Finalizations. All the things that happen after something ends. I checked the time. 12 hours left. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the outcome was already decided. The clock was just catching up. Ethan stood. No urgency. No performance. Just movement. He looked around the room once. At the board. At the table. At the space he had controlled for years. Then back at me. You win. He said. Simple. Clean. No conditions. I shook my head slightly. No. A pause. Then, I corrected it. That landed differently. Because winning is temporary. Correction is permanent. He nodded once. Understood. Then he walked out. No one stopped him. No one followed. Because there was nothing left to say. The room slowly returned to motion. Voices. Documents. Low conversations. Normal. Always normal. I picked up my phone. Closed the dashboard. Turned off the screen. And for the first time since this began, I stood without purpose. No next move. No next step. Just still. Victoria approached me. Careful. Measured. You didn't just protect yourself, she said. No, I replied. I removed the risk. She studied me for a second, then nodded. Respect. Not forced. Outside, the city was exactly the same. Lights. People moving through their lives like nothing had changed. Because from the outside, nothing had. But inside, everything had. I stepped out of the building. The air felt different. Lighter. Not because something was added, because something was gone. Control. My phone buzzed once more. A notification. Final confirmation. Transfer complete. Structure updated. Ownership consolidated. 72 hours. Exactly. I looked at the screen for a second, then locked it, put it away, and kept walking. Because the best part about taking control is not holding it. It's knowing no one else ever will again. And I never looked back.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real persons or events is coincidental. This video is not news, not a documentary. It is presented for creative storytelling purpose only. AI assisted production.